Rachel Beaumont clutched the weathered letter from the bank in her trembling hands, the threat of foreclosure looming over her like a dark storm cloud. The year was 1875, and at 23 years old, she was about to lose everything her father had worked for, the modest cattle ranch in the Montana Territory that had been her only home since birth. The sight of a lone rider approaching her property brought her back to the present. Tall and broad-shouldered, the stranger sat confidently atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His dark Stetson shaded his face, but she could feel his eyes taking in every detail of her struggling ranch: the sagging fence posts, the leaky barn roof, the dwindling cattle herd in the distance. "Good afternoon, madam," he called out, his voice deep and smooth as he drew closer. "Name's Jackson Wade. I'm looking for the owner of this property." Rachel straightened her spine, her chin lifting defiantly despite her worn dress and the loose strands of auburn hair that had escaped her practical braid. "You're looking at her. I'm Rachel Beaumont." Surprise flickered across his tanned face before he schooled his features. "Miss Beaumont." "I wasn't expecting a woman," she finished for him, crossing her arms. "Well, Mr. Wade, what business do you have with me and my ranch?" He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Up close, she noticed the fine quality of his clothes, not flashy, but well-made, and the way his eyes, blue as a summer sky, assessed everything with keen intelligence. "I'd like to discuss purchasing your land," he said, removing his hat and revealing thick dark hair. "I'm willing to offer a fair price." Rachel's heart sank, another vulture circling her failing ranch. "This land isn't for sale, Mr. Wade." "I heard differently." He glanced pointedly at the letter she'd hastily shoved into her pocket. "Word travels fast in these parts." "Bank's giving you until the end of summer, isn't that right?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. "My financial matters are none of your concern." "They could be," he replied smoothly. "I've been looking to expand my holdings. Your 500 acres would connect nicely to my property on the North Ridge. I'm prepared to offer enough to settle your debts and leave you with something to start fresh elsewhere." "Start fresh," Rachel echoed, indignation rising within her. "This is my home, Mr. Wade. My father is buried on that hill. My mother's roses still bloom by the porch. I'm not interested in starting fresh elsewhere." Jackson Wade studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Pride won't feed your cattle or fix your roof, Miss Beaumont. The way I see it, you've got two choices: sell to me now on your terms or wait for the bank to force you out on theirs." "There's a third option," Rachel countered. "I save my ranch." A smile tugged at his lips, not unkind but skeptical. "And how do you plan to do that?" "That's my concern, not yours." She gestured toward the road. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Wade, I have work to do." He replaced his hat with a deliberate motion. "I admire determination, Miss Beaumont, but sometimes it pays to be practical. My offer stands until the end of the month." He handed her a card with an address in the nearby town of Pine Creek. "Think it over." Rachel watched him ride away, anger and fear warring within her. Once he disappeared over the rise, she allowed herself a moment of despair. 3 years of drought, falling cattle prices, and her father's unexpected death had left the once prosperous Beaumont ranch teetering on the edge of ruin. She'd worked herself to exhaustion, taken odd jobs in town, and even sold her mother's silver to keep things going, but it wasn't enough. The bank wanted $500 by September, and she had less than 50 to her name. With a deep breath, Rachel tucked Jackson Wade's card into her pocket alongside the bank notice. She wouldn't be selling to him or anyone else, not if she could help it. This land was all she had left of her family, and she'd fight to keep it until her last breath. The following morning, Rachel rose before dawn as usual. After a simple breakfast of coffee and leftover biscuits, she headed to the barn to milk her 2 remaining dairy cows. The early June air was still cool, but the cloudless sky promised another scorching day. As she approached the barn, she noticed something strange. The door, which had been hanging from a broken hinge for months, was fixed. Not just propped up, but properly repaired with new hardware. "What in the world?" she murmured, running her fingers over the smooth metal. Inside, she found more surprises. The leaky water trough had been patched and fresh hay had been spread in the stalls. Her tools, usually scattered where she'd last used them, had been organized neatly on the workbench. Rachel's first thought was of her elderly neighbor, Mr. Griffith, but his rheumatism had been acting up lately, making such repairs impossible. Her second thought was more troubling. Had Jackson Wade taken it upon himself to improve her property, to increase its value for his purchase? The sound of hammering drew her outside and around to the corral, where she found the answer to her question. Jackson Wade, dressed in a simple work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, was replacing a broken fence post. His fine coat and vest hung on a nearby rail and his hat sat atop them. "Mr. Wade," she called out, marching toward him, "what do you think you're doing?" He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow despite the early hour. "Good morning, Miss Beaumont. Fixing your fence, as you can see." "I didn't ask for your help," she said, coming to a stop a few feet away. "And I certainly can't pay for it. Did I ask for payment?" He drove another nail into the post with a powerful swing. "You're trespassing. Technically, you invited me onto your property yesterday." He straightened, revealing a torso hardened by years of physical labor despite his businessman's clothes. "And I didn't see a no trespassing sign." Rachel crossed her arms. "It's implied when I said I wasn't selling." Jackson set down his hammer and reached for a canteen hanging from the fence. After taking a long drink, he offered it to her. She declined with a shake of her head. "Miss Beaumont, I'm not trying to trick you into selling. Consider this neighborly assistance." "We're not neighbors yet, Mr. Wade, and I don't accept charity. It's not charity." He gestured to the expanse of her ranch. "It's practical. This land has good bones but needs work. Whether you sell to me or someone else eventually, these repairs need doing." Rachel felt her temper rising. "There won't be a someone else. This ranch isn't for sale now or ever." "Then consider it an investment in a stubborn neighbor," he replied with an infuriating smile. "Because I bought the Rollins place yesterday afternoon." Rachel's mouth fell open. The Rollins property bordered hers to the east, which meant Jackson Wade truly was her neighbor now. "That doesn't give you the right to help," he interrupted. "Miss Beaumont, I've spent most of my life working ranches. I can see when something needs fixing and I fix it. It's that simple." "Nothing is ever that simple," she muttered. He shrugged. "Sometimes it is. Now, I've got about half this fence to finish, and then I thought I'd take a look at that roof. Unless you'd prefer I leave your barn to collapse when the summer storms hit." Put that way, Rachel found herself at a loss for words. Pride warred with practicality. She desperately needed the help, but accepting it felt like admitting defeat. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked finally. Something flickered in his eyes. "Let's just say I know what it's like to fight for something that matters." He picked up his hammer again. "You can stand there glaring at me all day, or you can make yourself useful and hand me those nails." After a moment's hesitation, Rachel moved to the toolbox and scooped up a handful of nails. Whatever game Jackson Wade was playing, she'd keep her guard up. But in the meantime, she couldn't deny that her fence was finally getting fixed. Over the next week, Jackson appeared every morning at dawn. Despite Rachel's initial resistance, a tentative routine developed between them. He would arrive with tools and sometimes materials, work until the heat became unbearable, then return in the late afternoon to continue until dusk. Rachel maintained her distance at first, watching suspiciously as he repaired fences, cleaned out irrigation ditches, and reinforced the barn's foundation. But gradually, she found herself working alongside him, holding boards in place or fetching tools. They spoke little beyond what was necessary for the tasks at hand. On the seventh day, as they finished replacing a section of the barn roof, Rachel finally broke their unspoken truce. "Why haven't you mentioned buying my land again?" she asked as they gathered their tools. Jackson wiped his brow with a bandana. "Would it make a difference if I did?" "No," she admitted, "but most men would keep trying." "I'm not most men, Miss Beaumont. He packed the last of the tools into a wooden crate, and I don't waste breath on lost causes. So you've given up. He glanced at her, a wry smile playing on his lips. Let's just say I'm taking a different approach. By fixing my ranch, by being a good neighbor. He lifted the crate easily. Speaking of which, I brought some beef and vegetables. Thought you might appreciate a proper supper after working all day. Rachel hesitated. Sharing a meal felt more intimate than working side by side. It crossed an invisible boundary she'd been careful to maintain. I can manage my own supper, she said stiffly. Jackson shrugged. Suit yourself. But I've got more than I can eat, and it seems a shame to waste it. Rachel's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. She hadn't had fresh beef in weeks, subsisting mainly on eggs, milk, and whatever vegetables her small garden produced. Fine, she relented, but I'll cook it. An hour later, they sat on Rachel's porch, eating beef stew with biscuits she'd quickly prepared. The sun was setting, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. It was the first time Rachel had shared a meal with anyone since her father died, and she found herself unexpectedly enjoying the company. This is good, Jackson said, helping himself to a second serving. You're quite the cook. My mother taught me. She could make something delicious out of almost nothing. Rachel smiled at the memory. During lean times, she'd serve dandelion greens and pretend they were a delicacy from back east. Smart woman, Jackson commented. Adaptation is key to survival out here. Rachel studied him curiously. You talk like someone who's had to adapt. Everyone has to adapt one way or another. He set his empty bowl aside. Tell me about your father. How did he end up here? Rachel was surprised by the question but found herself answering. He came west after the war between the states. Said he'd seen enough of death and wanted to build something instead of destroy. He worked cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny, then bought this land when it was nothing but wild grass and potential. And your mother? She was a schoolteacher in the first settlement. They met when Pa broke his arm and was stuck in town for a few weeks. Rachel smiled at the memory. He always said it was the luckiest broken bone in history. Jackson chuckled. Sounds like he was right. They built everything here together, Rachel continued, gesturing to the ranch around them. The house, the barn, the life they wanted. When I was born, they said I completed their dream, her voice caught. Ma died of fever when I was 16. Pa held on until 3 years ago. That's when things started going downhill, Jackson asked gently. Rachel nodded. Pa had connections, friends who'd worked with him for years. After he died, the bank wasn't as willing to extend credit to a woman running a ranch alone. Then the drought hit, and cattle prices fell. She trailed off, not wanting to reveal the full extent of her financial troubles. And now you're determined to save it all on your own, Jackson finished for her. Wouldn't you be? She challenged. If this was all you had left of your family, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the darkening landscape. Yes, he finally said, I would. Something in his tone made Rachel look at him more closely. In the fading light, his face seemed younger, more vulnerable than she'd seen before. What about your family, Mr. Wade? She asked. Jackson, he corrected. If we're going to be working together, you might as well use my name. Jackson, she repeated, surprising herself with how naturally it came to her lips. And I'm Rachel. He nodded in acknowledgement. To answer your question, Rachel, my family's story isn't as inspiring as yours. My father was a gambler and a drunk who lost our Texas ranch when I was 12. My mother died trying to birth my sister, who didn't survive either. I'm sorry, Rachel said softly. Jackson shrugged as if dismissing old pain. It was a long time ago. I worked ranches across 4 territories, learned everything I could, saved every cent, and eventually bought my first piece of land in Colorado. Sold it for a profit, then bought more. Now I own 3 properties, including the Rollins place. You've done well for yourself, Rachel observed. I've been lucky, he replied, and stubborn. He glanced at her with a hint of a smile. Something we have in common, it seems. The comment should have irritated her, but instead, Rachel found herself smiling back. For the first time, she saw Jackson Wade not as a threat to her independence, but as someone who might understand her struggle better than most. As twilight deepened into night, Jackson stood to leave. "I should head back. Got an early meeting in town tomorrow." "Thank you," Rachel said, surprising herself again. "For supper and the repairs." He tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Rachel. I'll be back the day after tomorrow to finish the irrigation ditch." As she watched him ride away, Rachel tried to ignore the conflicting emotions stirring within her. Jackson Wade was still the man who wanted to buy her land, who represented a threat to everything she was fighting to preserve. But he was also the first person in 3 years who had offered help without making her feel diminished by it. And that, she realized with some alarm, made him dangerous in an entirely different way. The next day, with Jackson away on business, Rachel rode into Pine Creek. The small town was bustling with its usual mix of ranchers, merchants, and travelers passing through to larger settlements. She headed straight for the general store, owned by Martha Wilson, one of the few people in town who had treated Rachel with consistent kindness since her father's death. "Rachel Beaumont, as I live and breathe," Martha exclaimed as Rachel entered. "I was beginning to think you'd become a hermit out there." Rachel smiled at the plump, gray-haired woman. "Just busy, Martha. How are you?" "Can't complain, can't complain. Business is picking up with all the new folks moving into the territory." Martha leaned forward conspiratorially. "Speaking of which, I hear Jackson Wade's been spending time out at your place." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. "News travels fast." "Small town," Martha replied with a shrug. "And when a bachelor like Jackson Wade starts visiting a young woman daily, people notice." "It's not like that," Rachel said quickly. "He's just helping with some repairs." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" "Martha," the older woman laughed. "I'm teasing, dear, but you should know Jackson Wade is quite the catch. Handsome, successful, and from what I hear, a perfect gentleman." "He wants to buy my ranch," Rachel said flatly. "Ah," Martha's expression sobered. "And you're not selling?" "Never," Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Well, that puts things in perspective." She began gathering items Rachel regularly purchased. "The usual supplies today," Rachel handed over her list, which was shorter than in previous months. "Just the essentials." As Martha filled her order, Rachel glanced around the store. New merchandise lined the shelves, canned goods from back east, bolts of fine fabric, even a display of ladies' hats that would have delighted her mother. It had been so long since Rachel had purchased anything not strictly necessary for survival. "How are things really going out there?" Martha asked quietly as she tallied Rachel's purchases. Rachel hesitated, then admitted, "Difficult. The bank's breathing down my neck." Martha's kind eyes filled with sympathy. "Your father would be proud of how hard you're fighting, Rachel. But he wouldn't want you working yourself to death either." "I'm not giving up," Rachel insisted. No one said anything about giving up, but accepting help isn't surrender. Martha finished packing Rachel's supplies. "That'll be $2.45. Rachel counted out her money carefully. As she handed it over, the bell above the door jingled, and several well-dressed women entered, chattering excitedly. "Have you heard about the Independence Day celebration?" one asked Martha. "Mr. Wade has offered to fund fireworks and a proper dance." "The first real social event in ages," another added. "Everyone's talking about it." Rachel slipped her remaining coins into her purse, acutely aware of how plain her faded calico dress looked compared to the newcomer's fashionable attire. She gathered her purchases quickly. "Rachel, wait," Martha called as she headed for the door. "You'll come to the celebration, won't you? Do you good to enjoy yourself for once." The other women turned, some with curious expressions, others with barely concealed disdain. Rachel had grown used to being viewed as an oddity, the stubborn woman trying to run a ranch alone. "I don't think so, Martha. Too much work at home." "Nonsense," Martha insisted. "Even you deserve one night off, besides." She lowered her voice with a wink. "I hear Mr. Wade is an excellent dancer." Rachel felt her face flush again. "Goodbye, Martha," she said firmly, and hurried out to her wagon. As she loaded her supplies, she noticed a commotion down the street. A crowd had gathered outside the bank, and at its center stood Jackson Wade, deep in conversation with Mr. Harrington, the bank manager. Rachel couldn't hear their words, but Jackson's posture was relaxed, confident, while Harrington nodded enthusiastically. What business did Jackson have with the bank that held her mortgage? Rachel frowned, her suspicions rekindling. Was his neighborly assistance merely a ruse to gain her trust, while he negotiated with the bank behind her back? She was about to march over and demand answers when Jackson glanced up and spotted her. His face broke into a smile, and he excused himself from Harrington to walk toward her. "Rachel," he greeted her, "I thought you rarely came to town." "I need supplies like anyone else," she replied, more coolly than she'd intended. "You seem quite friendly with Mr. Harrington." If Jackson noticed her shift in tone, he didn't show it. "Just finalizing some details about the Rollins property. Previous owner left a few loose ends." "Is that all?" His brow furrowed. "Should there be something else?" Rachel hesitated, feeling foolish for her suspicions but unable to dismiss them entirely. "No, I suppose not." "Have you heard about the Independence Day celebration?" he asked, changing the subject. "The town hasn't had a proper one in years, apparently. So I heard. Very generous of you to fund it," he shrugged. "It's good for community spirit and business." His eyes brightened. "You'll attend, I hope." "I doubt it. The ranch will survive one evening without you," he finished. "Come on, Rachel, all work and no play makes for a dull existence." "I'm not here for excitement, Mr. Wade," she replied stiffly. "I'm here to save my home." His smile faltered. "Back to Mr. Wade, is it?" "What happened since last night?" Rachel glanced pointedly toward the bank. "Nothing. I simply remembered where we stand." Confusion crossed his features, followed by realization. "You think I was discussing your property with Harrington?" When she didn't deny it, he sighed. "Rachel, whatever you may think of me, I'm not underhanded. If I wanted to pressure you through the bank, I'd tell you to your face." She wanted to believe him, but years of fighting alone had taught her caution. "I should go. There's still daylight left for work." Jackson stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. "Of course. I'll see you tomorrow as planned." As Rachel drove her wagon out of town, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd made a mistake. Jackson had given her no real reason to distrust him, quite the opposite, in fact. He'd spent days helping her without asking for anything in return. Yet the alternative, that he truly was just being kind, was almost more troubling. Because if Jackson Wade wasn't the mercenary businessman she'd initially believed him to be, then she was in danger of seeing him in a different light altogether. And that was a complication she couldn't afford. True to his word, Jackson returned to the ranch the next morning. If he was bothered by their interaction in town, he gave no indication of it. Instead, he arrived with a load of lumber and supplies that far exceeded what was needed for the irrigation ditch. "What's all this?" Rachel asked as he unloaded the wagon. "Your chicken coop is falling apart," he replied matter-of-factly. "And that south pasture fence won't last another month. Thought we might as well fix them while we're at it." Rachel stared at the pile of materials. "Jackson, this must have cost." "It's an investment," he interrupted, not meeting her eyes. "In good neighboring." She knew he was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. The supplies before her represented more money than she'd seen in months. No one made that kind of investment in a neighbor without expectation of return. Yet as the day progressed, and they worked side by side on the irrigation ditch, Rachel found her suspicions once again giving way to something else: appreciation for his company as much as his help. Jackson was knowledgeable about ranching, quick to laugh, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. He never treated her as less capable because she was a woman, something rare in Rachel's experience. By mid-afternoon, they had completed the ditch and moved on to reinforcing the chicken coop. As Rachel held boards in place for Jackson to nail, she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking: the confident way he handled tools, the strength in his hands, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. My father would have liked you, she said suddenly, surprising herself. Jackson paused, hammer in mid-swing. Would he? Rachel nodded. He respected competence and hard work. She smiled slightly. Though he might have questioned your business sense, spending so much time helping someone who won't sell you what you want. Jackson resumed hammering. Maybe I've decided there are more important things than business. Such as, he finished securing the board before answering, such as doing what's right, helping someone who deserves it. His eyes met hers briefly, getting to know a remarkable woman. The air between them seemed to still. Rachel felt her heart quicken, and for a dangerous moment she allowed herself to imagine a different future than the lonely one she'd resigned herself to. Then reality reasserted itself. She was fighting to save her ranch, not to find romance. And Jackson, whatever his current motivations, had come to her initially as a buyer, not a suitor. We should finish before dark, she said, breaking the moment. There's a storm coming. Sure enough, clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising the first substantial rainfall in weeks. They worked faster, completing the chicken coop just as the first heavy drops began to fall. You should stay for supper, Rachel said as they gathered their tools. Wait out the worst of the storm. Jackson looked surprised but pleased by the invitation. I'd like that. Inside Rachel's modest house, they worked together to prepare a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of the beef Jackson had brought previously. As rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, the small kitchen felt cozy rather than cramped. Tell me more about your ranching experience, Rachel said as they ate. You mentioned working across 4 territories. Jackson nodded. Started as a cowhand in Texas when I was 13. Moved to New Mexico, then Arizona, then Colorado. Worked every job there is: herding, branding, breaking horses, even chuck wagon cook for a spell. Not a very good one, I imagine, Rachel teased, nodding toward the meal she'd prepared. He laughed. I could keep men from starving, but that was about it. His expression grew more serious. I learned something different from each outfit I worked, saved every penny. By the time I was 25, I had enough to buy my first small spread in Colorado. That's impressive, Rachel said sincerely. I was lucky, he replied. Had good mentors. Men who saw potential in a skinny kid and taught him instead of taking advantage. He twirled his coffee cup thoughtfully. Your father must have been a good mentor too for you to run this place on your own. Rachel smiled sadly. He taught me everything he could. Though I don't think he ever imagined I'd be doing it alone. She sighed. There was a foreman, Tom Bailey, who stayed on after Pa died. He helped for almost a year, but then his sister fell ill in Oregon and he had to go. Couldn't afford to replace him. It's remarkable what you've accomplished on your own, Jackson said. Most men couldn't have done half as well. The compliment warmed her, but Rachel shook her head. And yet here I am, 3 months from losing it all. It doesn't have to be that way, Jackson said quietly. Rachel tensed, expecting him to renew his offer to buy her land. Instead, he surprised her. Have you considered taking on a partner? He asked. Someone to invest in the ranch, share the work and the profits, but leave you as partial owner. Rachel blinked. A partnership. It's not uncommon, Jackson explained. Many ranches operate that way. You'd keep your home, maintain a stake in the land your parents built, but have help carrying the burden. The idea had never occurred to Rachel. In her mind, the choice had always been stark: keep the ranch entirely or lose it entirely. I don't know, she admitted. Who would even consider such an arrangement? Jackson held her gaze steadily. I would. Rachel's breath caught. You. It makes practical sense, he said. Your land adjoins mine now. Combined, they'd make one of the most promising ranches in the territory. You know this land better than anyone, and I have capital to invest. Together, we could not only save what your parents built but expand on it. It was a tempting proposition, far more appealing than selling outright. Yet Rachel hesitated. A business partnership requires trust. It does, Jackson agreed. And trust takes time, but we have a little of that left, don't we? Enough to consider the possibility. Outside, the storm was beginning to abate. The the thunder more distant now. Rachel rose to clear their plates, needing a moment to process his suggestion. "I'll think about it," she finally said. Jackson nodded, accepting her non-committal answer without pressing. He helped her with the dishes, and they worked in companionable silence until everything was clean and put away. As he prepared to leave, the rain having stopped entirely, Rachel walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said, "for everything today. The repairs, the conversation. The alternative to selling." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a small smile. "Wait until you've had time to consider whether you could tolerate being my partner." "I've tolerated you for days now," she pointed out, and found it surprisingly bearable. His laugh was warm and genuine. "High praise indeed, Miss Beaumont." Standing in the doorway, Rachel was suddenly acutely aware of their proximity. Jackson seemed to realize it too, his expression softening as he looked down at her. "Think about the partnership," he said softly, "and the celebration in town. Sometimes taking a chance leads to better things than we imagined possible." Before Rachel could respond, he stepped back, replaced his hat, and headed to his horse. She watched him ride away, her thoughts in turmoil. A partnership would save her ranch, but it would also bind her future to Jackson Wade's in ways she hadn't considered before today. And somewhere between repairing fences and sharing meals, Jackson had become more than just a neighboring rancher with designs on her land. He'd become someone whose presence she looked forward to, whose opinion she valued, whose smile made her feel things she'd long since buried beneath the weight of responsibility. That night, as Rachel prepared for bed, she found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, really looking at herself for the first time in months. Her work-roughened hands, her sun-browned skin, her hair simply braided for practicality rather than beauty. When had she stopped seeing herself as a woman and become merely a rancher fighting for survival? And what would it mean to start seeing herself differently again? The days leading up to the Independence Day celebration passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Jackson continued helping Rachel with repairs around the ranch, but they carefully avoided further discussion of his partnership proposal. Instead, their conversations remained focused on the work at hand or shared stories of their past experiences. Rachel found herself looking forward to these moments, Jackson describing a cattle drive through a mountain pass during an early snowstorm, or her recounting how her father had once traded their best horse for a bull that went on to sire the finest herd in the county. There was an easy rhythm to their interactions now, a comfort that belied the short time they'd known each other. 3 days before the celebration, Martha Wilson arrived at the ranch with a large package wrapped in brown paper. "Special delivery," she announced cheerfully when Rachel answered her door. "Martha, what are you doing all the way out here?" The older woman bustled past her into the house. "Bringing you this." She set the package on the table with a flourish. "Open it." Rachel unwrapped the paper cautiously to reveal a beautiful dress of deep green cotton, with delicate white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It was simple compared to the fashions she'd seen in town, but finer than anything she'd worn in years. "Martha, I can't accept this," Rachel said, even as her fingers traced the soft fabric longingly. "You most certainly can," Martha replied firmly. "It's not from me, though I wish I'd thought of it. It's from an anonymous benefactor who thought you might need something nice for the celebration." Rachel's head snapped up. "Jackson," Martha's expression was carefully innocent. "I couldn't possibly comment on who left it at my store with instructions to deliver it to you." "Martha." "Fine, yes, it was Mr. Wade. But before you get all prideful and stubborn, consider that he specifically asked me not to tell you it was from him." Martha crossed her arms. "He knew you'd refuse it if you knew." "He was right," Rachel said, even as part of her wanted desperately to keep the beautiful dress. "Rachel Beaumont, that man has spent weeks helping you save your ranch. Would accepting one dress really be so terrible?" Martha shook her head. "Besides, it's practical. You can't go to a social gathering in work clothes." "Who says I'm going?" Martha gave her a knowing look. "Aren't you?" Rachel hesitated. The truth was, she'd been thinking about the celebration more than she cared to admit. After years of isolation, the idea of music, dancing, and community held a powerful appeal. And yes, the prospect of seeing Jackson in a social setting rather than covered in dirt and sweat from ranch work was intriguing. "I haven't decided," she hedged. "Well, now you have a proper dress if you do decide," Martha said triumphantly. "And if you don't, it'll still be nice for church or other occasions." Put that way, it was hard to argue. Rachel relented. "Thank you for bringing it out here, my pleasure." Martha's eyes twinkled. "Now, shall I help you try it on, make sure it fits?" An hour later, Rachel stood before her mirror in the new dress, barely recognizing herself. Martha had not only helped with the dress but had insisted on styling Rachel's hair as well, demonstrating how she could arrange it for the celebration. "There," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Jackson Wade won't know what hit him." "That's not why I'm considering going," Rachel protested weakly. Martha just smiled. "Of course not, dear." After Martha left, Rachel carefully hung the dress in her wardrobe. She told herself she still hadn't decided whether to attend the celebration, but the flutter of anticipation in her stomach suggested otherwise. The next day, Jackson arrived later than usual, looking tired but pleased with himself. "Sorry I'm late," he said as he dismounted. "Had business in town that took longer than expected." "More planning for the celebration?" Rachel asked, trying to sound casual. He shook his head. "Different matter entirely." He glanced around the ranch. "I was thinking we might work on the root cellar today. With proper storage, you could preserve more of your garden harvest for winter." Rachel agreed, and they spent the morning clearing out the old cellar and reinforcing its walls. As they worked, Rachel found herself watching Jackson more closely, wondering about the man behind the helpful neighbor. What drove him to continue investing time and resources in her ranch when she still hadn't agreed to sell or partner with him? "Jackson," she said during a break, "why are you really doing all this?" He looked up from the beam he was measuring. "I told you yes, being a good neighbor, investing in the future, all that," she interrupted. "But there must be more to it. No one is this generous without reason." Jackson set down his tools and met her gaze directly. "You want the honest truth," Rachel nodded, heart beating faster. "When I first came here, I saw your ranch as a business opportunity," he admitted. "Good land that was underutilized because its owner lacked resources. I thought I could make you a fair offer, acquire the property, and expand my holdings. And now I see a woman fighting with everything she has to preserve something precious, someone who values legacy and memory more than easy money." His voice softened. "I admire that, Rachel. It reminds me of what I once fought for myself. So this is sympathy?" The word felt bitter on her tongue. "No," he said firmly. "It's respect, and maybe a desire to prove that not everyone is looking to take advantage of your situation." Rachel studied his face, searching for deception but finding only sincerity. "The partnership you proposed, is that still your aim?" "It's an option I hope you'll consider," he replied carefully. "But it's not why I fixed your roof or repaired your fences. I did those things because they needed doing and I was able to help." "And the dress?" she asked quietly. Surprise flashed across his features, followed by a rueful smile. "Martha wasn't supposed to tell you." "She didn't exactly, I guessed." Jackson shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I thought you deserved something nice for the celebration, something to remind you that you're not just a rancher but a young woman who should enjoy life occasionally." His words echoed her own thoughts so closely that Rachel felt momentarily unbalanced. "Thank you," she said simply. "It's beautiful." "So you'll come?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. Rachel found herself smiling. "Yes, I'll come." The day of the celebration arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, and a gentle breeze to temper the July heat. Rachel spent the morning completing her chores, then allowed herself the luxury of a long bath, washing her hair and skin with the lavender-scented soap she saved for special occasions. As she dressed, Rachel felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. It had been so long since she'd attended a social event that she worried she'd forgotten how to behave in company. What would people think when she arrived? Would they whisper about the struggling rancher woman in her new dress, speculating about her relationship with Jackson Wade? She pushed these thoughts aside as she arranged her hair as Martha had shown her, securing it with her mother's pearl combs, one of the few pieces of jewelry she hadn't sold. The green dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and complementing her auburn hair. Looking in the mirror, Rachel hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. A knock at the door startled her from her contemplation. She wasn't expecting anyone. Jackson had mentioned he'd be busy with preparations in town all day. Opening the door, she found a young boy from town standing there with a carriage behind him. "Miss Beaumont," the boy asked. "Mr. Wade sent me to drive you to town for the celebration." Rachel was momentarily speechless. The carriage was small but well-maintained with freshly polished wood and brass fittings. "That's very kind," she finally managed, "but I was planning to ride in myself." The boy shrugged. "Mr. Wade thought you might prefer not to arrive on horseback, given the occasion. Said to tell you it's entirely your choice, but the carriage is paid for either way." Once again, Jackson had anticipated her needs before she'd even recognized them herself. Riding into town would have meant dust on her new dress and wind-blown hair before she even arrived. "Thank you," she said, retrieving a shawl from inside. "I'd be delighted to accept the carriage." The ride into Pine Creek gave Rachel time to collect her thoughts. Jackson's attentiveness was becoming harder to dismiss as mere neighborliness. The repairs, the supplies, the dress, and now the carriage, each gesture spoke of consideration beyond ordinary kindness. And if she were honest with herself, her own feelings had evolved far beyond grudging acceptance of his help. She looked forward to his daily arrivals, missed his company on days he couldn't come, and found herself thinking of him in quiet moments when her mind should have been on ranch concerns. But what did it mean? Was Jackson Wade truly interested in her, Rachel Beaumont, or was this elaborate courtship merely a more sophisticated strategy to acquire her land? And even if his interest was genuine, what future could they have when the shadow of her failing ranch hung over everything? As the carriage approached Pine Creek, Rachel set these questions aside. Tonight, she decided, she would simply enjoy herself: the music, the food, the celebration of the nation's independence. And yes, the company of the infuriating, generous man who had upended her carefully ordered existence. The town had been transformed for the occasion. Red, white, and blue bunting decorated storefronts, lanterns hung from every available post, and a wooden platform had been erected in the town square for dancing. Tables laden with food lined one side of the square, while musicians tuned their instruments on a small stage. Rachel's carriage arrived just as twilight was settling. Many townsfolk were already gathered, dressed in their finest clothes, chatting excitedly about the upcoming fireworks, a rare treat in this remote territory. As the driver helped her down, Rachel felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of curious glances directed her way. Martha Wilson spotted her immediately and hurried over. "Rachel, you look absolutely stunning, my dear. That color is perfect on you." "Thank you, Martha, and thank you again for your help." "Nonsense, it was my pleasure." Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Jackson's been looking for you. He's over by the refreshment table, speaking with the mayor." Rachel's eyes found him instantly, standing tall among a group of town officials. He was dressed more formally than she'd ever seen him: dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a fitted vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his face freshly shaved. Even from a distance, he was handsome enough to make her heart quicken. As if sensing her presence, Jackson looked up, his conversation forgotten mid-sentence when he saw her. A smile spread across his face as he excused himself and made his way through the crowd toward her. "Rachel," he said when he reached her, his voice warm, "you came." "I said I would," she replied, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Thank you. She gestured to the decorations around them. This is quite impressive. The town hasn't seen a celebration like this in years. It seemed overdue, Jackson replied. People need occasions to come together, especially in hard times. The band began playing, a lively tune that drew couples to the dance floor. Jackson offered his arm. Would you do me the honor? Rachel hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. I should warn you, it's been a while since I've danced. We'll go slowly, he promised, leading her to the floor. Despite her concerns, Rachel found that dancing came back to her naturally. Jackson was an attentive partner, guiding her through the steps with a gentle hand at her waist and steady rhythm. As they moved together, the years of isolation and struggle seemed to fall away, leaving only the music, the warm summer night, and the undeniable connection between them. You're a natural, Jackson said as the first dance ended and another began without them separating. Rachel laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. My mother insisted I learn properly, said every young lady needed to know how to dance, even on a cattle ranch. Wise woman, Jackson commented, drawing her slightly closer as the tempo slowed. She'd be proud to see you tonight. The simple observation touched Rachel deeply. Thank you for saying that. As the evening progressed, Rachel found herself the center of more attention than she'd experienced in years. Several townspeople who had previously barely acknowledged her now approached with friendly conversation. Men asked her to dance, though she accepted only a few offers, preferring to return to Jackson's side. They shared a meal at one of the long tables, joined by Martha and several other townsfolk who seemed genuinely interested in hearing about Rachel's ranch. For the first time in ages, she spoke of her property with pride rather than anxiety, describing the improvements she and Jackson had made over the past weeks. You two make quite the team, observed Mr. Peterson, the town blacksmith. Reminds me of how your parents worked together, Rachel. Your father's vision and your mother's practicality. The comparison startled Rachel, but before she could respond, a call went up that the fireworks were about to begin. Jackson touched her elbow gently. There's a better view from the hillside, he murmured, away from the crowd. Rachel nodded, allowing him to guide her away from the square and up a gentle slope that overlooked the town. Other couples and families were scattered across the hill, but Jackson found them a relatively private spot beneath an old oak tree. As they settled on the grass, the first firework exploded overhead, painting the sky with brilliant red light. Rachel gasped in delight. She'd seen fireworks only once before as a child and had forgotten how magical they appeared against the night sky. It's beautiful, she breathed as more colors burst above them, blue, white, green, and gold, each accompanied by gasps and cheers from the crowd below. Yes, it is, Jackson agreed, though when Rachel glanced at him, she found him looking not at the sky but at her. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. In that moment, with the colored lights playing across his features, he looked both familiar and mysterious, the hard-working rancher who had repaired her fences, and something more, something that made her heart race. Rachel, he said, his voice low enough that she had to lean closer to hear him over the explosions overhead. There's something I need to tell you. What is it? She asked, suddenly apprehensive. Jackson took a deep breath. I went to the bank the day before yesterday. I paid your mortgage. Rachel stared at him, certain she had misheard. You what? I settled your debt with the bank, he repeated, in full. The fireworks continued overhead, but Rachel barely noticed them now. Why would you do that, without even telling me? Because I saw how much that ranch means to you, he said simply, and I couldn't bear the thought of you losing it. But Rachel struggled to make sense of his actions. That must have been $500, Jackson nodded. $512 with the interest. I can't accept that, she said automatically. It's too much. I could never repay. I'm not asking for repayment, he interrupted gently. Consider it an investment if you like, or a gift. Either way, the ranch is yours, free and clear. Rachel's mind whirled with implications. No more bank debt meant she could focus on making the ranch profitable again. without the constant pressure of imminent foreclosure. It meant security, breathing room, hope. But it also meant being indebted to Jackson in a way that went far beyond the practical help he'd already provided. Such a gift created an obligation she wasn't sure she could bear. "This doesn't make sense," she said finally. "You wanted to buy my land. Why would you spend a small fortune ensuring I keep it instead?" In the light of the fireworks, she saw Jackson's expression soften. "Because somewhere between fixing your fence and dancing with you tonight, I realized I didn't want your land anymore, Rachel. I want you." The simple declaration hung between them, more dramatic than any firework. Rachel felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her, rearranging everything she thought she understood about Jackson Wade and his intentions. "You want me," she repeated uncertainly. "Yes," he confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I want to court you properly, Rachel Beaumont. Not as a business arrangement or a land deal, but as a man who admires a remarkable woman." Rachel was speechless, a tangle of emotions making it impossible to form a coherent response. Relief, joy, and suspicion warred within her. Could she trust this sudden shift? Or was this simply a more sophisticated strategy to eventually gain control of her ranch? Jackson seemed to read her thoughts. "I know it's hard to believe," he said quietly, "and I understand if you need time to consider whether you can trust my intentions. But I promise you, Rachel, the mortgage is settled with no strings attached. Whatever happens between us, your ranch remains yours." The fireworks reached their crescendo overhead, a spectacular display of light and sound that matched the tumult in Rachel's heart. As the last burst faded and darkness returned, she found herself facing a choice she'd never anticipated. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Jackson took her hand gently. "You don't have to say anything tonight. Just know that my feelings are genuine, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." The tenderness in his voice undid her final reservations. Without overthinking, Rachel leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, sweet kiss. When she pulled back, Jackson looked as stunned as she felt by her impulsive action. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the mortgage, but for everything, for seeing me when no one else did." His smile was slow and genuine. "Thank you for letting me see you." As they walked back toward town, hand in hand beneath the star-filled sky, Rachel felt as though she was stepping into an unfamiliar but promising landscape, one where she was not alone in her struggles, where hope and possibility stretched before her like the vast Montana prairie. The days following the Independence Day celebration brought significant changes to Rachel's life. Word of Jackson's generosity spread quickly through the small community, transforming public perception of Rachel from a stubborn woman clinging to a failing ranch to a respected landowner with a promising future. More importantly, Jackson began courting her openly and properly. He still came to help with ranch work, but now he also brought flowers, invited her to Sunday dinners, and occasionally convinced her to set aside her chores for picnics by the creek that separated their properties. For Rachel, who had known nothing but work and worry for years, these moments of leisure were almost as precious as Jackson's practical assistance. She found herself laughing more, worrying less, and gradually opening herself to possibilities beyond mere survival. A month after the celebration, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Jackson broached a subject they had carefully avoided since the night of the fireworks. "Rachel," he began, "I've been thinking about the future. Your ranch is secure now, but it could be so much more. The partnership I proposed before it still makes practical sense." Rachel tensed slightly. Despite their growing closeness, the question of the ranch's future remained sensitive. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Jackson chose his words carefully. "That we combine our resources, your land, my capital, both our expertise. We could run the properties together as equals, make improvements that would benefit both ranches." "As business partners?" Rachel asked, studying his expression. "For now," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Though I hope in time we might consider a more permanent arrangement." The implication was clear, and it sent a flutter through Rachel's chest. Still, caution made her hesitate. "I've been independent for so long, Jackson. The idea of sharing control, of trusting someone else with my parents' legacy." "I understand," he said gently. "And I'm not asking for an answer today, just for you to consider it." Rachel nodded slowly. "I will consider it, truly." As summer gave way to fall, Rachel did more than consider Jackson's proposal. She found herself imagining a future that included him in every aspect of her life. Their courting continued, growing deeper and more meaningful with each passing week. Jackson became a fixture at her ranch, and Rachel began visiting his property as well, admiring the improvements he'd made to the old Rollins place. One crisp October afternoon, they rode together along the boundaries where their lands met, discussing potential improvements for the coming spring. "This valley would make excellent grazing land if we cleared some of these scrub trees," Jackson observed, gesturing to a stretch of land that straddled their properties. "My father always wanted to develop this area," Rachel replied. "He said the soil here was perfect for alfalfa, which would mean better feed for the cattle in winter." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. He was right. With proper irrigation from the creek, we could have a fine hay field here by next summer. Rachel smiled at his use of "we," no longer finding it presumptuous, but comforting. Over the past months, their separate visions for their ranches had gradually merged into a shared future. Though she had not yet formally accepted his partnership proposal, in practice, they had already begun operating as a team. As they crested a hill overlooking both properties, Jackson reined his horse to a stop. "What do you see?" he asked, gesturing at the panorama before them. Rachel gazed at the landscape, her neat homestead with its repaired buildings, Jackson's larger ranch house in the distance, the cattle grazing peacefully in between, and the mountains beyond. "I see possibility," she answered honestly. "I see what my parents dreamed of and something more." "I see our future," Jackson said quietly, "if you're willing to share it with me." Rachel turned to him, realizing this was more than a discussion about land management. "Jackson," he reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Rachel Beaumont, I love you. I think I've loved you since the day you stood on your porch and told me your land wasn't for sale, looking as fierce and determined as any person I've ever met." Rachel's heart soared at his declaration. "Even though I was rude to you, especially because you were rude to me," he laughed. No one had spoken to me that way in years. Most people saw Jackson Wade the successful rancher, not the orphaned cowhand who fought for everything he has. "And what do I see?" she asked softly. "You see me," he replied simply. "Just as I see you, not as the struggling rancher woman or a business opportunity, but as Rachel, brave, stubborn, beautiful Rachel." He dismounted and moved to help her down from her horse. As her feet touched the ground, he kept his hands at her waist, drawing her closer. "I'm not just proposing a business partnership anymore," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I'm asking you to marry me, Rachel, to join our lives as well as our lands, to build something together that's greater than either of us could create alone." Rachel had imagined this moment, dreamed of it even, but the reality of Jackson standing before her, open and vulnerable in his love, was more powerful than any fantasy. The man who had once seemed a threat to everything she cherished had become essential to her happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Jackson Wade, I'll marry you." His smile was brilliant as he pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised passion, partnership, and a lifetime of love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Rachel rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When?" he asked simply. Rachel thought for a moment. "Christmas," she decided. "A new beginning as the year ends." "Christmas it is," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though that gives us only 2 months to prepare." "It's enough," Rachel said confidently. "We've accomplished more difficult things in less time." They rode back to Rachel's ranch hand in hand, their horses ambling peacefully side by side. As they approached the homestead, Rachel saw it with new eyes, not as her solitary refuge, but as the beginning of something larger, a foundation upon which she and Jackson would build their shared future. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Pine Creek. Martha Wilson insisted on hosting a celebration at the general store, where townsfolk gathered to offer congratulations and share their joy. Rachel, who had lived so long on the margins of the community, found herself warmly embraced as one half of what Martha declared the most romantic match this territory has seen in years. "He spent every penny fixing what was yours," Martha said, eyes twinkling, "and in return he won your heart. If that's not a proper love story, I don't know what is." As autumn deepened, Rachel and Jackson divided their time between ranch work and wedding preparations. They decided to hold the ceremony at Rachel's ranch, a symbol that their union would build upon the foundation her parents had created. Jackson threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness. He arranged for a proper minister to travel from Helena, ordered furnishings to expand Rachel's modest house, and even surprised her with a beautiful wedding dress ordered from Denver. "You can't see it until the day," Martha insisted when it arrived, hiding the package before Rachel could peek. "It's bad luck." For her part, Rachel found herself embracing this new chapter with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. The woman who had once been determined to carry her burden alone now delighted in planning a shared life. She preserved the last of her garden harvest with renewed purpose, knowing it would sustain not just her but her husband through the winter months. Husband. The word still sent a thrill through her whenever she thought of it. December arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed the landscape into a winter wonderland. 2 weeks before Christmas, Jackson's ranch hands helped transport furniture and supplies to Rachel's homestead, expanding and improving the house that would become their marital home at least until spring, when they planned to begin construction on a larger house situated between their two properties. The day before the wedding, Rachel stood in her kitchen, surrounded by friends who had come to help with final preparations. Martha supervised the cooking, while other women from town decorated the house and barn with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles. "Are you nervous, dear?" Martha asked as they worked side by side preparing pies for the wedding feast. Rachel considered the question seriously. "Not about marrying Jackson," she said finally. "That feels more right than anything I've ever done, but I am a little nervous about the changes ahead. I've been on my own for so long." Martha patted her hand. "Marriage is a partnership, Rachel, the best kind. Based on what I've seen, you and Jackson already understand that better than most couples who have been married for decades." That evening, following tradition, Jackson stayed at his own ranch while Rachel spent her last night as a single woman in the house where she had grown up. As she prepared for bed, she found herself drawn to the window that faced north toward Jackson's property. A light shone in the distance, his ranch house, where he too was likely awake, thinking of tomorrow. The sight filled Rachel with a quiet contentment. Tomorrow would bring change, yes, but not the loss of independence she had once feared. Instead, it would mark the beginning of a stronger, more resilient future built on mutual respect and love. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Rachel woke early, her excitement making sleep impossible. Martha arrived soon after, bringing the mysterious wedding dress and several other women to help Rachel prepare. "It's perfect," Rachel gasped when Martha finally revealed the gown, an elegant creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was more beautiful than anything Rachel had ever owned, yet not so elaborate that she felt uncomfortable. "Jackson chose well," Martha said approvingly. "He said he wanted something as practical and beautiful as the bride herself." Dressed and ready, with her hair arranged in soft curls and her mother's pearls at her throat, Rachel waited in her bedroom while guests arrived and gathered in the decorated barn. Through her window, she watched wagons and riders approach from town, more people than had visited the ranch in years. A knock at the door announced her father's old friend, Mr. Griffith, who had agreed to escort her to the ceremony. "You look just like your mother on her wedding day," the elderly man said, eyes misting with emotion. "She and your father would be so proud, Rachel." "Thank you," Rachel replied, blinking back tears of her own. "I like to think they'd approve of Jackson." "No doubt about it," Mr. Griffith assured her. "Your father always said he hoped you'd find a man as hardworking and honorable as yourself. Seems to me you've done just that, with Mr. Griffith's steady arm supporting her. Rachel made the short walk from the house to the barn. The winter air was crisp against her cheeks, the snow crunching beneath her boots. At the entrance, Martha waited to make one final adjustment to Rachel's dress before opening the doors. Inside, the transformation was magical. Lanterns illuminated the space, which had been cleared of its usual farm equipment and filled instead with rows of chairs occupied by townsfolk and neighboring ranchers. Evergreen garlands scented the air, and at the far end, beneath an arch of winter greenery, stood Jackson. He was dressed in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that captured Rachel's heart, the look of absolute wonder and love, as he watched her walk toward him on Mr. Griffith's arm. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Rachel remembered the warm pressure of Jackson's hands holding hers, the sincerity in his voice as he recited his vows, and the moment when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Their first kiss as a married couple was gentle but full of promise, sealing a bond that had begun with confrontation and grown into the most important relationship of her life. The celebration afterward was joyful and relaxed. Tables had been set up along one side of the barn, laden with food prepared by the women of Pine Creek. A small band played lively tunes, and couples danced on the straw-covered floor. Children darted between the adults, playing games and helping themselves to slices of Martha's famous apple pie. Throughout the evening, Rachel found her gaze continually drawn to her husband. The reality of it still amazed her. Jackson moved easily among their guests, charming the women, discussing cattle prices with the men, and making everyone feel welcome in what was now their home. When he caught her watching him, he would smile that special smile she knew was reserved for her alone, and sometimes make his way back to her side, as if he couldn't bear to be separated for too long. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" he asked during a quiet moment, his arm slipping around her waist. "Very," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to the name. You could always keep Beaumont for the ranch," he suggested. "The Beaumont Wade Ranch has a nice ring to it." Rachel looked up at him in surprise. "You wouldn't mind?" "Rachel, I fell in love with you precisely because you hold on to what matters. Your name, your family's legacy, they're part of who you are." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Besides, our children will carry both our names in blood, if not in signature. Children." The thought sent a warm glow through Rachel. A family of their own, raised on the land her parents had loved, surrounded by the community that had finally embraced her. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Rachel and Jackson stood together on the porch, thanking each person for sharing in their special day. The snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting lazily from the dark sky. "Look," Jackson said, pointing upward once the last wagon had pulled away. Rachel followed his gaze to see a star shining brightly through a break in the clouds, its light undimmed by the gently falling snow. "My mother used to say that a star on your wedding night means a blessed marriage," she said softly. "Then we're doubly blessed," Jackson replied, drawing her close. "Because we've already been given the greatest gift, finding each other when neither of us was looking for love." Rachel turned in his arms to face him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she was feeling. "I love you, Jackson Wade. Thank you for seeing value in what was broken, for spending every penny to fix what was mine." "I love you, Rachel Wade," he answered, his voice husky with emotion. Thank you for showing me that the most valuable things can't be bought, they can only be earned through patience, respect, and love. As they shared a tender kiss beneath the Christmas star, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of their story. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, building on the foundation of trust they had established, creating a legacy even stronger than the one her parents had left her. The ranch that had once been her burden had become their shared joy. And the man who had arrived as a potential buyer had become her partner in every sense of the word: husband, friend, lover, and fellow dreamer of a future limited only by their imagination and determination. 1 year later, on a crisp December morning, Rachel stood on the porch of the new house she and Jackson had built that summer. Located on the ridge between their original properties, it offered a commanding view of the expanded Beaumont Wade Ranch, which now encompassed nearly 1,000 acres of prime Montana grazing land. The past year had brought changes beyond Rachel's wildest dreams. With Jackson's capital and her knowledge of the land, they had increased their cattle herd, improved irrigation systems, and hired reliable hands to help with the expanding operation. The struggling ranch of Rachel's past had been transformed into one of the most promising in the territory. But the greatest transformation had been in Rachel herself. The fiercely independent woman who had fought so hard to maintain her isolation now found her greatest joy in partnership not just with Jackson, but with the community that had rallied around their success. "There you are," Jackson said, joining her on the porch. "Martha's wagon just passed the south gate. She's bringing the cake she promised." Rachel smiled. "Good, everything else is ready for the party." They were celebrating their first anniversary with a Christmas gathering for friends and neighbors, a tradition they planned to continue for years to come. The house was decorated with evergreens and red ribbons, much like their wedding had been, and delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen where Rachel had spent the morning cooking. Jackson slipped his arm around her waist, his hand coming to rest protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. Their first child was due in the spring, a daughter, Rachel felt certain, though Jackson insisted they were having a son. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Wade," he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Rachel leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her heart. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year, how much you've changed me. For the better, I hope, definitely for the better." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You taught me that independence doesn't have to mean being alone. That accepting help isn't weakness. That love makes us stronger, not vulnerable." Jackson's eyes, warm with affection, held hers. "You taught me a few things too, about fighting for what matters, about the value of legacy and roots, about patience." He grinned at the last word. Rachel laughed. "You, patient, the man who proposed marriage 3 months after we met. It felt like an eternity," he protested, drawing her closer. "And every day since has confirmed it was the right decision." As they shared a tender kiss, the sound of approaching wagons announced their first guests. Soon the house would be filled with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of community, a far cry from the solitary Christmas Rachel had endured in years past. Jackson reluctantly released her. "I'll go help Martha with her cargo. You should rest a bit before everyone arrives." Rachel nodded, knowing he worried about her doing too much in her condition. "I'll just check on the roast first." As Jackson headed down the steps to greet Martha's approaching wagon, Rachel took one more moment to savor the view, the land that had been her burden and was now her joy, the home she and Jackson had built together, the future that stretched before them full of promise. She had once thought Jackson Wade only wanted her land. Instead, he had spent every penny fixing what was hers, and in the process, had healed something in her that she hadn't even realized was broken: her capacity to trust, to hope, and to love without reservation. With a contented smile, Rachel turned and went inside to prepare for the celebration, her hand resting gently on her growing child, the newest branch of the legacy she and Jackson were building together on the foundation her parents had laid. The land remained hers, as Jackson had promised. But her heart, her future, and her dreams now belonged to both of them, a partnership more valuable than any ranch, and more enduring than any deed of ownership. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their ranch prospered, Rachel would often tell their children the story of how their father had once been a stranger who she thought only wanted her land, until the cowboy spent every penny fixing what was hers, and in doing so, captured her heart forever.